Today's video is sponsored by BetterHelp. Grand total for building this 2-story timber frame barn was...
Well, would you look at that? I've never seen quite as quintessential a barn as that.
Oh boy, wow, it is a winter wonderland. How's my Ginny barn cat? We got a lot of snow last night, huh, sweetie? I don't know, I'm gonna guess that we're somewhere in the neighborhood of about, 5 or 6 inches. It's really thick and wet snow too. But with a snowstorm like that, I'm very glad that we have this barn. Yeah, in today's video, I'm gonna give you guys a full breakdown of how much it cost to build this barn, talk about the process we went through, how we did it, give you guys some tips if you're thinking about doing something similar yourself. I'll also give you a full tour of things. But before I can do any of that, I gotta do my animal chores first. Would you look at this? Got my large white farm dogs crawling out of the work. Oh, hi, good to see you guys. All right, let's go do chores, come on. Looks like this heavy wet snow snapped my electrical cable. So I'm just gonna turn the fence off. There's lots of good tension on this side. Seems like I have a break somewhere on the line on this side. But because we have our guard dogs, we're not too worried about it, are we, Abby dog? So yes, over the last year plus essentially, we have been building a very large timber frame barn here at our farm in Vermont. The barn itself is 40 feet by 50 feet. It's 2 stories high, as you can see over there. On top of that 40 by 50 interior space, the barn also has about a 50-foot long overhang that lets me store lumber and equipment. The construction of this barn has been absolutely the construction of my dream barn. The barn I have pictured over and over again over the years when I thought about what the barn should look like on our farm. I've been actually planning on building this barn for probably about 3 years now, and to see it finally come to fruition has just been, I don't know, very incredibly satisfying for me. And some might even be wondering, well, why didn't you just fix up the other barn that you have? And that's something I'll answer later on in this video. Would you look at Abby dog? She's being such a goof right now. All right, Abby dog, Toby dog, should we go see the birds? In we go. Hey, everybody. Good morning, good morning. Look at all these birds. You trying to eat my feet? Yeah, some of these chickens have no manners, Toby. Good morning, weird chickens. So Carmen, are you officially becoming a weird chicken? I'm starting to wonder about you, girl. Release the Kraken! The ducks and geese were totally good to go outside. The chickens are much more skeptical. So the process for building the barn started with coming up with the plan for the barn. Like first and foremost, I had to figure out like what exactly I was looking for. And then as I thought through that part, I really had to come up with some ideas of how I'd get it done, as well as some specific strategic choices that exist there. Like, did I want to hire the work out or build it myself? Did I want a wooden structure or a metal structure? If it was a wooden structure, did I want to do like stick construction like you typically build a house? Or did I want to go post and beam and timber frame like the way we ultimately went? Like all of those choices, as well as the most important choice of what do you want to actually do in the barn, dictate what you're gonna ultimately do to build your barn. All of these were choices I had to make in order to make our barn. So the reason I wanted to build this new barn was we had a couple of very specific uses for it. Number one, I wanted a place where I could park my tractor. I also wanted a spot where we could park our vehicles in the winter if we wanted to get out of the snow. I also wanted a workshop space. Now I know one of the big questions again is why didn't I just work on this big 3-story bank barn that we have on our farm? And believe me, I seriously considered it. I actually brought in a number of folks and got estimates on what would it take to be able to do all of the things that we're gonna do with this new barn and do it with this barn. And when it comes down to it, because of the size and complexity and the specialized skills required for somebody to work on this gigantic structure, it was looking like it was gonna cost about $100,000 more to fix up this barn versus build the barn that we ultimately ended up with. And even with all that money, I would still have the dilemmas of, number one, what would I do with the animals? Because I do have the cattle living in this barn during the winter, and the fix-up plan would have made that impossible. And then number two, because it's an old barn, the amount of maintenance and sort of ongoing repairs I was gonna have to be faced with over a span of 20 years or so, say, was gonna be significantly higher versus just building new. And so that's what drove the decision to say, nope, for this barn, I'm gonna keep it up, I'm gonna maintain it, I'm gonna keep it in decent working order, I'm gonna use it for my animals, but I'm not gonna sink a bunch of money into it. And I made the decision to go with the brand new barn. Now, when it comes to building this barn, we had that choice of, do we build a metal structure or a wooden structure? To build a metal structure of roughly the same size, it was gonna cost about $100,000 less than what we ultimately built with this wooden, timber-framed post and beam barn. Now, just for the folks who are not very familiar with construction, you know, a post and beam barn essentially means that the structure and the configuration of the barn is built on posts, and then everything else is kind of framed up around it, versus contrasting it to, like, say, a traditional stick-built house where you're essentially framing everything and anchoring that to the foundation and building upward that way. And so for our barn, we went with the post and beam, and we went with also what's known as timber frame, this lost ancient art of building interlocking wooden pieces and really using that as a way to structure and solidify the building. But the reason we went with the more expensive wooden barn was we were really thinking about the aesthetics of it all and wanting the character of this structure to match the look and character of this structure. You know, while they are dying off, the old wooden barn here in Vermont has just a very rich heritage and tradition. And so that's what drove our choice to go with the more expensive timber frame. And I got to admit, I'm very happy with that choice at this point. The number of neighbors that I've had say, oh my gosh, your barn looks beautiful. So I do feel like it was the right choice. If you live in a different part of the country, or if your circumstances are different than ours, I could totally understand why you might go with a metal structure. And yes, a lot of this also plays into the dilemma that I have of, you know, when I think about what paid for this barn, it wasn't necessarily the financial choice I would make if we were just a farm alone, but because we make the videos too.
Ginny Barncat deserves a palace built with Google AdSense dollars.
And speaking of the unique nature of our farm, it's probably a really good time to share just a word from our sponsor today, BetterHelp. You know, as I've talked to you guys a lot, especially over the course of this year, focusing on your mental health is really, really important. And one of the best ways to do that is by using therapy. I know for me personally, therapy has been a tremendous tool in dealing with everything from my binge eating disorder to thinking about just dealing with stresses and, you know, struggles with, say, depression. Therapy has really made a massive difference in my life. And so if you're somebody who's struggling and maybe thinking about needing some help, perhaps you should look into therapy. And one of the ways that I've done it over the years is by actually using BetterHelp. BetterHelp can connect you to a trained and licensed therapist who can listen to your challenges, give you an unbiased perspective, and really help sort through a lot of different issues. And for me, as a guy who lives out in the middle of nowhere, you know, getting access to face-to-face, like sitting down in a physical location type of way with a therapist can be really, really challenging. But through BetterHelp's platform, you're able to connect either by phone or by video or even by text. And they have a very wide network of more than 30,000 therapists, all with a variety of specialties, making it easy for you to find the right fit. And in most cases, you can be matched with a therapist in less than 48 hours. Over 4 million people have used BetterHelp to help access a happier and healthier lifestyle. If you're hearing all of this and you want to try BetterHelp right now, you can use the link right down below in the description of this video, or you can go to betterhelp.com/goldshawfarm. And if you use that special link, you can save 10% off your first month with BetterHelp as you work with that therapist. So if you are struggling, perhaps you want to give BetterHelp a try. This is the design of our barn right here.
Right now we have all 5 of these eave posts that I'm going to demonstrate some cuts on, and from there it's the top plates and the rafters and the cupola is pretty much most of what we have left to cut.
You know, it's interesting. A lot of the lumber that ultimately became our barn was cut last year, right around this time when Justin, who was the guy I hired to both design and build the barn, really started to go to work in his workshop a few towns away from us. But even before that moment, there was a lot of work that had to happen to build this barn. Number one, my buddy Alfred had to prep and clear this site.
My buddy Alfred, he lives on down the road. He's a wizard with machines, a genius in blue jeans. Let's stop and say hello. My buddy Alfred, Vermont's best so-and-so. Brick engineer, searching, driving heavy gear. Ain't nothing he don't know.
So yes, the entire structure of this here barn sits on these concrete piers that you see right here down at this corner. So Alfred went through and pretty much every 12 feet buried one of these guys. And then he actually also built these special mounting brackets that attach to the pier itself. Now, some folks may wonder, well, why didn't I just pour a foundation and go like the traditional route? And that was another cost-driven decision. You know, to do the piers, it was not that much money, relatively speaking, when I compared it to what would it take to pour a 40 by 50 concrete foundation, particularly a concrete foundation that would need to go to about 6 feet deep so that it sits below the frost line. Probably would have cost somewhere between 20 and 25% more to build this entire barn if we went with that poured foundation. And so while I feel like we went big by opting for the timber frame barn, I feel like we also kind of cheaped out a little bit when it comes to the foundation. And probably one of the biggest things that some folks have criticized me for is that we ended up going with the gravel floor. At some point in the future, if there's certain portions of the floor here that I want to make into concrete, I can just build a pad and pour it myself. But now with the barn designed and all the materials ordered and the site prepped, by the time we got to March, Justin was ready to go. We actually had a very mild winter last year. We decided to take advantage of the breaks in weather, and Justin and team just started working. They started by just hauling all of the materials down here, and so for the first couple of weeks they were just here on site putting together the pieces. But once that happened, we had this one period of time where Justin and team brought in a crane. It was a crazy day. We went from having like nothing going on here to a barn in about 36 hours. And then with the structure entirely constructed, it was a couple more weeks of the team going through and putting in siding and tightening things up, doing all the things you think you would need for an actual build. I know I've been putting this off, but I guess I should give you guys a tour. It's still a work in progress. But let me give you the full rundown of the barn and how it's all laid out and how we plan to use it and how I've been using it and all that good stuff. Right here is the human door, and then just to the side of the human door is the gigantic electrical panel that we have for this thing. All the power for this barn comes from the solar cooperative we're a part of. Right now, you'll notice that there's just a lot of vehicles in here because of the snowstorm last night. I brought everything inside. Of course, one thing that always is gonna happen when you have your cars in here is it's gonna get barn cat tracks all over it. Now, this portion of the barn is tall enough so that I can bring my tractor right into it, and I could even actually bring the tractor all the way back to, I don't think it'll clear that beam, but you know, the front part could go all the way back here, and typically that's what I would do. This area over here is like my shop area with the tools and everything I need, as well as some space to work on projects as I need it. This is a back door. Eventually I might build a greenhouse off the back of this barn, and that's kind of the plan for that door. This part right here is like all of the chaos. Eventually my plan is to have everything in the barn be neat and organized and together, but you know, I'm still in the process of doing that, so please don't shame me. Actually, it wasn't only until late last week that the electricians even finished up all of their work and I could start fully moving in, and so that's what's been going on over here. And speaking of electricians, you'll notice that there's like these quad outlets at pretty much every post in the entire barn, meaning I have easy access to power as I need it. You know, when I talk about the modern barn and kind of some of the needs that we have, you know, access to electricity is one of those biggies, including access to electricity so that we can charge our electric car. Now, I could probably do a whole video on my barn organization system and how I landed on it, and maybe if you guys want to see that, let me know down in the comments. But moving up here, sort of the upper level of the barn, my plan is to eventually have more storage and maybe a little hangout area or a spot that I could shoot videos in, like right around here. Inside this space, I'm going to be building out a little room, and that's going to be the hatchery. So when I hatch baby birds in the future, it's all gonna happen in this space over here. It's not gonna be like a big room, but it's gonna be like an insulated closet. So even though the rest of this barn is unfinished and not heated, it can be heated in that one little space. And then I'll be moving in all my incubators into that same space as well. So this now probably brings us to the portion of the video that most of you guys wanted to see from the moment you clicked on it, which is specifically how much did this entire gigantic barn cost us. And so please allow me to do a breakdown of all of the costs to the best of my abilities. And also know that these numbers are probably somewhat imperfect, but I'm trying to give you the best possible sense of what it costs to do what we did in our specific context, in case you're trying to do something similar. But also remember, I've been trying to build this barn for several years, and so I locked in most of the costs for both labor and materials for the majority of the activity here roughly 2 years ago, and with inflation, I would expect a lot of these numbers to be much, much higher now. All right, so let's get into the costs. Now, to start things off, remember, this is a 40 by 50 timber frame barn. It's got an overhang of roughly 50 feet. It's 2 stories tall. There's a cupola. It's got a pier foundation, gravel floor. Now, in terms of costs, let me try to go piece by piece, and just also know I did some rounding on these numbers too, just to make this simple. So starting with the design costs. So that's like everything with Justin, like doing all of the CAD work, figuring out what the layout's gonna be, working and going back and forth with me on that. That number right there also included doing like all of the schematics so that Justin could figure out like where every single cut needs to be and how every joint is supposed to look. So for example, if you look at all of the joinery of this entire barn, each piece has been cut to fit together. Like, you know, that's where that craftsmanship comes into play, like oak pins that are keeping this in place. You know, pretty much every joint throughout this entire structure was constructed that way. And this is work that happened a couple of years ago, and so I feel pretty good about that number right there. In terms of the site prep, so that's Alfred doing a lot of the work to both level out the ground as well as get ready to put the piers in place. That was about $6,000. Now, another big thing that we had to do from a site prep perspective is level out all the ground. So for example, before all the site prep work, this part of the barn right here was roughly, I don't know, almost 5 feet, 6 feet taller or higher than the back corner of the barn. And so we had to bring in material to level it all out. And so that was a bunch of that work that happened last fall. And then in terms of the foundation, back in the fall of 2022, that's when Alfred buried all of the piers that I was talking about earlier. And so all that work amounted to about $7,500. So just that in and of itself was about $13,000, a little more than $13,000. Then when it comes to the lumber, you know, we had to order all of the lumber and get it cut and get it set, and the cost for lumber was just shy of $40,000. Then we also had to get materials in terms of roofing, and there's a lot of square footage when you think about that roofing. And so all that roofing, which is designed nicely for the snow to slide right off, all of that was not cheap either. And so it amounted to about $25,000. Getting all of the materials here, that's a cost too. Remember, we had the lumber delivered to Justin's shop. Justin then had to do all the cuts, and then we had to bring the lumber there. So it's actually 2 locations that the lumber had to travel to. So that was about $4,500. Then all the labor to build the structure, like everything, like all the guys working on it throughout the spring, like everything that they had to do to build the barn, like put it all together, put on the siding, everything. That was about $90,000. Then we had to get the crane in, which was a huge cost savings in the long haul, but that 36 hours that we had the crane here was the most expensive 36 hours of the entire project, but it sped things up, and we actually had the crane come back a second time to do some of the final things, particularly with the roof trusses and roofing. For the specialty carpentry, like the doors and the stairs, that was about $5,000. And then for the electrical, that was a total of $13,000. So that was running lines from the street, that was running all of the conduit throughout the building, that was splitting off service. That also included putting in all of these boxes, as well as all the conduit for all the wiring to run in, as well as all of the lights. And actually at the same time that we were doing the electrical in the barn, we actually did some electrical work on our house so that we could start heating the house with electrical, which is a whole separate conversation as well. And so when you put all of that together, the grand total for building this 2-story timber frame barn was $209,500. Yes, that was not cheap in any means, and I feel like given the structure that we got, I feel very good about how things are ending up. And I will admit to a certain amount of vulnerability in sharing that number, because I know I'm probably gonna get crucified in the comments that I spent way too much, and no real farmer would ever do that. I guess you're kind of not wrong, because again, recognizing the unique nature of our farm, that's what enabled us to be able to build the barn the way that we did. And trying to obscure that fact is something that I would never want to do. And so yeah, that $209,000 is what it cost to get this structure built in 2022 and 2023. And although buildings like this are not cheap, I do feel like a building like this is meant to last a very long time.